So I'm going to take some time and answer the amazing questions that have been coming to us through social media, because the Titan arum is such an amazing plant and people have such interesting and fascinating questions. We don't know all the answers, but we'll give the answers that we have. So here's a basic one. When was the last time the corpse flower bloomed? So we have several corpse flowers here at San Diego Botanic Garden, and this particular bloom last bloomed in 2018. Somebody asks, how rare are they? Well, they're actually unfortunately quite rare now. They're native to the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, and unfortunately scientists believe that there are fewer than 1,000 plants left in the wild, and that really does make them a species of concern and endangerment. Somebody asks what kind of environment they grow in. Well, these plants are native to the tropical rainforest of Sumatra in Indonesia, and that's a very humid and hot climate. It can be over 90 degrees during the day and in the high 80s at night, and humid all of the time. And so these plants really like that hot humidity. Here we have them in our tropical conservatory for exactly that reason. They wouldn't be happy outdoors in San Diego County, even in the warmer months, because it's so dry. And so you really need a glass house or an environment where there's elevated humidity for these plants to thrive. How long will it take until we know if our pollination of Jack was successful? Well, unfortunately, it appears that that pollination was not successful. We've been looking for signs that the ovaries, those are the immature parts of the fruit, would swell, and that would let us know that it had been pollinated successfully, and we've not seen that yet, and so we don't think that we had a successful pollination. We're not 100% surprised, because the pollen that we got for that plant was a little bit older pollen, and the fresher the pollen, the more likely that we can pollinate. So we're hopeful for our next plant, Stinking Beauty, because we have much fresher pollen to pollinate that plant. So stay tuned. How often do you water and fertilize these plants? Well, that's a great question, especially if you want to grow them. The plants are a little bit finicky about water and fertilizer, especially when they go through their dormancy phase. So when a leaf dies back or when the flower dies back, you really want to water and fertilize sparingly, if at all. When they're in the leaf phase, then they really do want plenty of water and they can be fertilized a bit. When they're in the flower phase, we also are very, very sparing with our water and our fertilizer. The plant is charging when it's in its leaf phase. It's collecting energy from the sun and charging up that underground structure called a corm, and all that energy is in there, and when it has enough energy to flower, it flowers, and really it's the energy and nutrition that's stored in that underground storage body of the plant that it's using to feed itself while it's flowering. So we kind of let it go through that cycle with very little intervention. It's so smelly, somebody writes. How do we go near it when it's in the full bloom? Well, I've been very close to them when they're in full bloom, and I can tell you it's not always easy. The fortunate part of it is that the plants don't produce the smelly smell all the time, especially during the day when a lot of people are at the garden and our workforce is here. It's only sporadically smelly. You get kind of these wafting odors of it, and so that you can handle. At night, if you're here late at night after 11 o'clock until 3 in the morning, especially on the first night that it blooms, the smell can be pretty bad. In fact, just walking in the room is like a pretty big punch in the face. But like so many unpleasant things in life, humans get kind of used to them, and so if you hang out in the room for a little while, just a distance from the plant, you kind of habituate, and then when you do get closer to the plant, you're kind of there. But if you leave and come back, you sort of remind yourself, oh my God, that's pretty nasty, and I don't know how I did that. Somebody here asks, what country do they come from? The corpse flower comes from Indonesia. 𝘈𝘭𝘭𝘶 titanum is the species of corpse flower we're looking at here. That's found only on Sumatra, Indonesia. But it's a very large genus. We're not even sure how many species are in the genus of 𝘈𝘭𝘭𝘶. There could be more than 100. And they are present all around Southeast Asia. So you can see things that look a lot like 𝘈𝘭𝘭𝘶 titanum around Southeast Asia, but for the one largest species, you have to go to Sumatra in Indonesia. Somebody here asks, why does the plant shrink after it blooms? And what they're noticing is that the spathe kind of contracts. It kind of gets tighter again on the spadix after the blooming cycle. And the theory for why that is that the plant is kind of protecting itself in the hopes that it's had a successful pollination, so that those fruits that are forming inside the plant are protected by that outer spadix being protected by the outer spathe while those fruits are growing. We're in the tropics. Nature loves to eat other parts of nature. There's insects and molds and fungus and all kinds of things that would like to eat this plant because it's full of nutrients and water and all kinds of things. So the plant has to have a lot of strategies to protect itself as it matures fruits. A lot of people have been noting in the newspaper over the last several years that organizations like the Botanic Garden that bloom Titan arums, they're seeing a lot of blooms in the fall. And they ask, is that common? You know, does this plant only bloom in the fall? That's an absolutely great question that I don't really know the answer to, but what I can say is that I have only seen Titan arums in the United States bloom between July and October, November. So it does appear that they favor the second half of our year. Whether that's true in the native range, I don't think that's true. I think it can technically bloom whenever it feels like it, but there's definitely something happening growing in cultivation where they are preferring the second half of the calendar year. Here's somebody who asks, can I grow the corpse flower in my backyard? Well, unless you live in a tropical rainforest, you probably can't grow a corpse flower in your backyard, or unless you have a very nice greenhouse in your backyard, you can't grow a corpse flower in your backyard. But there are some other species of Amorphophallus. In particular, there's a voodoo lily that's available in the trade, and it produces small flowers that look just like the Amorphophallus titanum flower, and they can be grown as seasonals or in even some parts of the United States as perennials, even in the backyard. So take a look for voodoo lily out there, and that's a plant that's like Amorphophallus that you can grow in your backyard. Somebody asks, why is it so hard to predict when the bloom will flower? And you know, that's a great question, and I don't know that we know the answer. It may just be that humans haven't cued in yet onto what this flower really responds to. We tend to understand cyclical plants very well. The plants that really reliably bloom every spring when the sun first warms up the soil. We know those plants. We know about the plants that bloom in the winter here in Southern California when we get good rains, right? We understand when there's a super bloom coming in the desert. We know about plants that bloom, you know, in the summer after very specific things happen. But there's a lot of plants out there, especially in the tropics where there's less temperature differentiation between the seasons, that can kind of bloom whenever they want to. And we have a lot less of an idea or ability to predict how they're going to work. And the corpse flower is just one of those plants that really keeps us guessing. And as human beings, we can try to think more like plants and understand what they're responding to. And maybe over time, we'll get better at predicting them. Once the flower blooms, how long does the smell last? So the plant typically only smells and is fully open for 48 hours. But biology is always keeping us guessing. And so I've seen flowers that really only bloom for 24 hours, and we've seen flowers that have bloomed for closer to 72 hours, with the smell extending into those full periods. But also, the smell is not consistent throughout that 24, 48, or 72-hour period. It's definitely strongest at night. It seems to definitely be strongest on the night of the first day of flowering, and there are even times in the middle of the day, in the middle of the flowering period, where you barely smell it. So it's definitely giving us some variety, but if you want to be near the smell that's strongest on the first night of flowering, after 9 p.m. is probably when you're going to get that strongest whiff.